702.
You're listening to the best of The Money Show.
The Money Show.
Welcome to the Best Bits of the Money Show, a digest of some of the most important contributions, thoughts, concepts and insights on the Money Show this week. If you'd like to hear more, please go to our website or your podcast app and search for The Money Show. Might well be worth sending to a friend, a colleague, a family member, someone who you think's about to make a financial decision or just needs a deeper understanding of what's going on in our economy. To start, some of the most important news stories from this week. The hearing of the Competition Commission's pursuit for justice, their investigation into the Rand manipulation case before the Constitutional Court. That case has been going on for a very long time. Arguments from all sides, so many of them, in the Constitutional Court this week. The Tourism Minister, Patricia de Lille, also dissolving the Board of SA Tourism. Quite an outcry to that. I think that story's got a long way to go. And then the inflation rate up by 0.5 percentage points from 3% in June to 3.5% in July. This week on Business Unusual, Graeme Codrington, lead researcher at Tomorrow Today, spoke about the surprising stock price fluctuations of Duolingo. It's a language learning app that's transformed into a tech startup. At one point, it had a valuation of $15 billion.
Yes, Stephen, for those who want to learn another language, Duolingo has hundreds, actually, of languages that you can learn. It is a sort of gamified type app where it uses all sorts of psychology to get you to do a few little translations a day, teaching you language and vocabulary and so on. I've used it to try and learn Zulu and even a little bit of Arabic as well. And it's probably most well known by people who use it as being slightly passive aggressive, actually. If you forget to do a lesson, sort of at about this time at night, it starts to chirp you a little bit and tell you just, how bad it would be if you lost your streak of days in training and things like that. And, I think you either like it or don't like it, but it is a fun way, maybe not the best way, but certainly a fun way to just learn a new language. But here's the thing, Stephen, people might not realize this. It was listed on the NASDAQ in 2021. It has a $15 billion, that's billion with a B,
wow,
dollar valuation for an app that teaches you a language for sort of 5 minutes a day. I mean, that's quite an insane stock price, that.
Yeah, and it's also not, to use the phrase, not a huge moat around it. Someone could copy that in a heartbeat. I mean, not me, but someone who knows what they're doing.
Well, exactly. There are lots of competitors, but Duolingo kind of got into the market I think it was launched in 2011. So again, not an old company, but they just seem to get it right. And just get the tone right, and they've got internal competitions that get everybody going. But I thought it would be an interesting case study of what's happened to them in the last about 9 months or so. If anybody wants to quickly check out the Duolingo stock ticker, it looks like a roller coaster for the last little while. And it's a little microcosm of what's happening more generally in any sector that is impacted by technology or technology trends, or especially generative AI. Because about 8 or 9 months ago, Duolingo announced that they were going to replace quite a lot of the people who work for them. Obviously, you've got to have people who are coming up with these little language models and these little daily tests that you do. And they were going to replace all of those people with generative AI. And there was immediately a massive backlash. And it was just before they'd even done it, just after they announced it, literally thousands of people went onto social media and announced, that's it. Exactly your point, Stephen. There are other competitors around. I don't have to be with Duolingo. I'm out of here if you are going to act that way to your people. It then turned out that those people were correct. AI is actually pretty bad at doing translation. I mean, it's quite good, but when you're learning a language, It's not the same as just being able to do a rough translation. Language has got lots of nuance and idioms. People know this. If I tell you that somebody kicked the bucket, you'd understand what I was saying. Or my favorite one that I can still remember from school in Afrikaans, om die bobbejaan agter die berg te gaan haal, which translated into English is to make a mountain out of a molehill. Anyway, we could have fun with this the whole evening, I suppose. But, AI isn't good enough yet to be able to handle that. And that started to play itself out. So Duolingo turned around and said, okay, we changed our mind. We're going to do it with humans again. The stock rebounded nicely. And then just last week, the new versions of a few generative AI platforms came out. So GPT-5, a new version of Grok, a new version of Claude. And they had increased dramatically the way in which they do translations and how good those translations are. So the market then crashes Duolingo's stock again. I think it's because people have got their eye on Duolingo now. So it's now a very sensitive stock. And then probably the killer thing that happened last week is it was leaked that Apple are most likely going to have real-time translation in the next version of their AirPods, the little in-ear headphones.
Wow.
And it's going to be all integrated. I mean, imagine that you can literally, this is, if you're a science fiction fan like I am, this is the Babel fish from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Pop it in your ear and choose which language you want to listen in. And again, Duolingo's stock crashed again. So, imagine being in Duolingo leadership right now, just trying to manage shareholder expectations and what's happening in the market. As I say, I'm pretty sure that any company involved in the technology world at the moment must just be strapped in tight to the roller coaster of change at the moment. And I just thought that Duolingo would be a great case study on that. It's fascinating.
This is one of the sort of issues of our time. So many people will talk about how, we've had investor after investor sitting in front of me telling me how much money we all need to put into AI. The NASDAQ, as it happens, is down 1%, precisely because your timing is immaculate as always, Graeme, of this issue that people are actually worried about the valuations. The problem was that it was given such a high valuation in the first place when it was obvious that... it's obvious now, but when it's obvious that people could sort of copy the model.
Yeah, exactly. And I think people who've heard me speak before maybe get slightly confused because I'm an absolute tech optimist. I love technology, been involved in it most of my career, and I would not tell anybody to step away from technology. I'm not a Luddite at all. But on the other hand, I am nervous of the hype at the moment. Generative AI can't do everything that the Sam Altmans and the Satya Nadellas of the world are claiming that it can. They're making huge claims because they've got these massive valuations they've got to prop up, and they are in continual funding rounds. And the amount of money they're looking for every 6 months is insane at the moment. So it really, really does feel like we're in a bubble. And I suppose the lesson that we should take away is if you're doing something that is truly valuable, that is adding real value to people, that is doing something that has a touch of humanity, can we call it that, attached to it, like even playing games to learn a new language, but there's this touch of humanity. It doesn't feel like you're stuck in some computer system. Yeah. There was this fun involved. Then you're probably fine. But if you succumb to some of the technology hype and just hand over your soul to the machine, I think the market might find you out in the next little while, and Duolingo might not be the only stock that starts to fall off the edge of a cliff in the next few weeks and months.
That was Graeme Codrington, the lead researcher at Tomorrow Today.
The best of the Money Show
on 702.
702.
I don't know about you, but I think it's likely you're feeling your money just doesn't go as far as it used to. In fact, you have a lot less money to spend than you did. It turns out there are important reasons for that. This week, in a special feature on The Money Show, we spoke to 4 people about how we're being caught up in this financial vice We started with the independent economist Elize Kruger. She'd been looking at the numbers from the BankServe Africa report released this week.
Yes, the BankServe Africa take-home pay basically, it's an average of all the salaries paid into bank accounts, cleared through BankServe Africa. So it is a snapshot of the status, I would say, of salary earners. And then we track that over time to get a feel for the trend in the employment market, trends in salary increases and so on. And what we really saw in this July number is a further tick down. And it was actually the first consecutive month of moderation in this take-home pay, which is starting to become a bit of a concerning trend, though it is off a fairly high base in the sense that we have moved lower since Feb, and we had quite a peak in Feb. So the average for the first 7 months of the year is still quite notably above a year ago.
You look at what people are being paid. There's also what people have to pay out. So, for example, last month we saw quite a big increase in tariffs from municipalities, for example. Yes, people are taking home money, but they have to pay out more as well. And I think the feeling is that you get a bit squeezed in the process.
Absolutely, especially, in the month of July. I think, the focus is very much on that, municipal account, where we get all these annual increases that are way above, average inflation in South Africa, and also above your salary increase. So this is really a month where that squeeze, I think, is really, in stark sort of focus. However, if you look at it over the total basket of the CPI, then, the picture is slightly more positive in the sense that average inflation is running at about, say, 3.5% for the year as a whole. Incidentally, also today's number. But say average for 2025 at 3.5%, and if you think about the salary increase around 5%, then you're looking at a real salary increase again in 2025, which theoretically should preserve purchasing power for salary earners somewhat.
Elize Kruger, thanks very much indeed. Independent economist. Benay Sager is the executive head at Debt Busters. Benay, good evening. You would think with interest rates coming down, with inflation being lower, the pressure would be easing a little. What are you finding?
Thanks, Stephen, for having me on the show. I think similar to what was said before, there's definitely relief from interest rate reduction, and we've seen a huge number of people tap into what's affectionately known as a two-pot retirement system. But I think where the pressure is, particularly from a lending perspective, is the average incomes haven't really grown over the last, let's call it 9 to 10 years, since 2015 or so. Yet we see things that are mandated, like, in terms of pricing, regulatory-wise, like electricity rates and all of that, have gone up, 65%, for example, electricity over the same period, petrol price 75%. And what we find is that these two things put together, the lack of growth in incomes plus the increases that we can't do much about because it's coming from public sector, really force people to borrow more. And what we're finding is that average debt levels for today's consumer compared to 2016 is 33% more. Now, the CPI impact over that period, over the 9-year period, is more than 50%. So you can say it's less than the inflation, but I think where the real pain point is those higher earners, we've highlighted on the show before, average debt levels about 80% higher than they were a few years ago. And I think that's where the real pain is coming from. These are expensive loans with high interest rates, and I think people are really struggling to repay them.
I mean, you can talk inflation, you can talk interest rates, you can talk all of that. If the level of debt is going up, people are under pressure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, maybe 10 years ago, if we had spoken on the show, which we didn't, but had we spoken on the show 10 years ago, we would have talked about, maybe luxury spending, people overstretching themselves. I think today, there isn't much more room to cut. If you look at some of the income bands we track very closely, particularly on the lower end, people are having to spend somewhere between 20 to 25% of what remains after debt repayments towards things like rates and transport. And these are not really things where there's a lot of flexibility. We know about the problems of the trains over the last several years. Alternative means of transport have become really expensive, people. We know about the rates and electricity. Not much one can do about that. I think that's where we're really seeing the difficulty hit the consumers.
Benay Sager, thanks very much indeed. Benay Sager is the executive head of Debt Busters. You with The Money Show, 18 minutes after 6. Focus tonight on the declining buying power of the South African middle class. I know you'll have a view and an experience. 011-883-0702 and 021-446-0567. Kevin Lings is the chief economist at Stanlib. Kevin, good evening. Is it possible to sort of pinpoint maybe where the squeeze sort of started, where the dynamic turned and average incomes just stopped going up?
Evening, Stephen. You can actually in South Africa. You can go back to about 2010, 2011. That's when it started to go in the wrong direction, and it's been pretty much continuous since then. And what you said in the introduction is 100% correct. The ability to afford goods and services has declined, even if you've got a job. And there are a couple of factors that go into that, one of which obviously is the inflation dynamic. What's been described is the difference between experienced inflation versus measured inflation. So if you look at the inflation basket, it's got many categories in it. But in truth, many of those items you very seldom spend money on, right? So if you look at the inflation rate for appliances, it's not like you go out and buy an appliance every day, and that current inflation rate is minus 3.6%. So that's incredibly low, and it goes into the calculation, and it helps to dampen down the measured inflation. But if you looked at electricity prices, which you do spend money on all the time, or if you looked at food prices, you spend money all the time, or you looked at transport costs, those prices are well in excess of that. And so, yes, the overall inflation rate, when you see it from stats, say it looks like it's under control. But what you experience, what you engage in with every day, and in South Africa, it's mostly food, transport, electricity, paying for waters, etc. Those numbers are significantly higher. And so when you look at your money after you've paid for those items, you have very little left. And obviously you want to still participate in the economy. And so many people then indulge in credit card debt, store credit in order to do that. And that's natural, that's obvious, but that credit becomes quite expensive. And so it eats into your ability to kind of manage your monthly expenses. But Stephen, I would say that that's not the main problem. The main problem is a lack of prospect, a lack of progression in your career, in your employment. So let me just describe that. So if you go to other countries, right, and you look at how do they cope? How do they cope with exactly the same pressures? What happens is there are many more job opportunities. So as you gain experience in your business or your company you're working for, you are looking to move up the corporate ladder. You're looking to prosper. You're looking for a better paying job. And those jobs are available. And so you find yourself moving to another business, a much better paying job. And in many instances, that can increase your salary in one go by 20%, 30%, because you've got this nice uplift as you change jobs. And when we look at, I was looking at the US, that is a massive component of how they accumulate income, is by changing jobs and getting a better paid job. And as you progress in your career, so you get towards the end of the career, you're earning significantly more than where you started. In South Africa, we don't have those opportunities. We're not investing, we're not growing, we're not employing, we're not expanding. There are very few opportunities. And so the ability for somebody to progress in terms of their salary, to get a promotion within their own business, or to move to another company for a much better paying job, that's incredibly limited in this country because you don't have economic growth. And then that stifles everything. And so these price pressures then compound. If you think about your own career, I mean, your prosperity has increased significantly over time because you've been able to move into different job opportunities, and those have given you an uplift in terms of your income. But if you don't have that prospect, if you don't have that option, you're still doing more or less the same job 20 years later, then your ability to progress is very limited, and the blame for that is the lack of economic growth, the lack of investment in South Africa.
Kevin Lings, you've put that so well. Thank you very much indeed. The chief economist at Stanlib, a very clear explanation of what's happening. Well, Jacolize Meiring is the senior researcher and head of the Personal Finance Research Division at the Bureau of Market Research. Jacolize, good evening. You've looked at the amount of money each generation gets. What differences do you see between the generations?
Yes, good evening, Stephen. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Yes, the Bureau of Market Research in our latest reports on personal income estimates for South Africa that we do on an annual basis, we've actually this year put a flavor of generations on it. We specifically looked at the disaggregates on income patterns across 4 generational groups for our adult population. So specifically on Generation Z, then so that's our younger generation, aged between 15 and 27 years. This was now as for last year. And then moving up to our born-free millennials, Generation X, and then our older adults, our silent generations, etc. So with Generation Z, what we could see from that is that from the adult population, so that's individuals aged 15 years and above in South Africa, they account for about 30% of the adult population, but earn only 7.4% of cash flow income. I'm quickly interrupting myself here. Cash flow income is our definition, is what actually goes into consumers' pockets based on our income expenditure model that we have at the Bureau of Market Research. So this income for the Generation Z, we could basically see that, remember, there's a high level of youth unemployment that is persistent in South Africa. Only 19.9% is estimated of that Generation Z to be employed, actually. And then while a large majority of Generation Zs are still remaining in education, obviously. But those that have completed a tertiary level education, so 7.2%, that's our estimate, already have a tertiary education, but they are responsible for 29% of that generation's income earnings. So that we can definitely see that translation. And then if we go to our born-free millennials, with that, we actually see that there's that strict the correlation almost between they make up about 36% of income in South Africa, and they're also about 36% of the population. But the reality is that 40% of our millennials, so those are individuals between the age of 28 and 43, are in the very low income group.
So I'm sorry to interrupt you, Jacolize, and you make the point in your research that, and this is common in many countries, the older you are, the sort of richer you are. You would expect that. But if you look at what Kevin Lings said just a moment ago, that your chances of actually progressing in an economy that doesn't grow are very low. My concern would be that the younger generation, so the generation after me, the generations after me, are not going to be able to catch up to where I am now. And if you look at what Kevin Lings said, that seems very likely.
Definitely, because our younger generations they're not receiving the opportunities to actually benefit from a stable career because there's no job opportunities that are available. They can't benefit from the growth in investments that we've seen over the last 4 years. And that was a big distinction that we could see in the general trends. Those individuals that were able to be exposed to investments through either the growth in your value of your portfolio in pensions and annuities or otherwise investments, those are the individuals that could move up the income in their income groups, where our lower generations, unfortunately, we're sitting with even our Generation X. We have a lot of our Generation X individuals that are sitting in that pressure of supporting parents and children. So, and if we look at our top older generations, there's only a very, very small portion of our older adults that has actually 1.9%. This is actually very, very bad statistics, but 1.9% of our older adults account for 53% of our older generation's income. The rest are all dependent on grants. So there's some real intervention that's needed so that we don't lose our generations. That there's not that if we don't improve employment opportunities for our younger cohorts and income growth doesn't become more inclusive, we're going to see inequality just deepening further, and we're going to possibly lose a generation that could be excluded from growth.
That was Jacolize Meiring, Senior Researcher and Head of the Personal Finance Research Division at the Bureau of Market Research. Just bringing it into that special feature we did this week on what's happened to your money over the last 15 years or so.
702. You are listening to The Money Show's best bits.
On personal finance this week, John Manika, the head of financial education at Old Mutual, looked at the good, the bad and the ugly of our personal finances. He also looked at how we've begun to show some real recovery despite some of the tough problems out there.
You know, sometimes, I guess because we watch the news and every time we watch the headlines and it's always something gone wrong. But trust me, when you look at the savings and investment behaviors of South Africans, there are some positive things there. And that's what the research is telling us. For me, it was quite encouraging for me to see that South Africans actually have a forward-looking posture, you know. So, and that's why we said, look, maybe let's talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly, so that we have a proper mixed bag, you know, of where we are as South Africans. Yeah.
So there are lots of reasons why we sort of lack some of the confidence. I mean, we look at the headlines, there's corruption, there's money wasted there. I mean, I was looking at it in Sunday newspaper the other day, and how many times was the headline, billions wasted? It's just all over the place. But you're suggesting that actually quite a lot more people are earning more money than they did last year. It's quite a big percentage.
No, absolutely. I mean, so I think this is the good side of South Africans. Don't let anybody fool you. South Africans are very optimistic. South Africans are very resilient. Even in a very challenging economic landscape, South Africans are very creative, and I think hopefully we'll share some of the insights on how South Africans are doing this. So I think the fact that about 44% of South Africans are saying they're actually earning more than what they were earning last year. We take it for granted that companies are offering wage increases above inflation or not. Trust me, if somebody gets a 1.5% increase and you ask them, did your salary increase? They will tell you it didn't, because they know what it means. There's a net effect, of course, taking tax into account. About 57% of South Africans are saying, actually, we have less debt compared to the same period last year.
I was amazed at that.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a lot less debt. And I mean, I don't know whether that's two-pot, whether it's something else, but why? How are people able to pay back debt in this economy? I mean, is it lower inflation? And somewhere, I haven't even used the phrase interest and rate yet. Yeah,
I think it's a combination of things. I for the first time, and what I saw in this report for 2025, that South Africans are now a lot more proactive when it comes to paying down debt. They actually make arrangements. I'm not saying it's all South Africans, but there's a sizable number of South Africans who are starting to engage their creditors to say, listen, I want to make an arrangement there. They are a lot more proactive. That's why we're seeing about 57% of them saying, well, they have less debt compared to the same period last year.
Could it be also just a function of, I mean, for a long time, you and many other people have been, I say this as politely as I can, trying to shove financial education down our throats. I mean, could it be having an impact maybe? At schools too, by the way, now.
It is certainly ticking in the right direction. And it's the work that the financial services industry is doing, and banks. And, I wish there could be more. But clearly, something good is happening in South Africa. And for me, that's very positive. Well, we also saw that 22% of household income actually account for savings. You might not pick it up when we look at the national savings ratio, because, I mean, we use a different formula there, because you're looking at GDP, income versus consumption. It doesn't give you a true picture, but it may as well be because a lot of South Africans still believe in stokvels. And you'll be amazed that even your affluent South Africans still believe in stokvels. They will actually belong to more than one stokvel. So generally, I think that's a good sign for South Africans. Again, I think the whole idea of having a secondary income is also encouraging from a South African point of view. I think when you look at the number of people, I'm talking about working South Africans, who's saying, actually, I've got an alternative income. In fact, 1 in 5 South Africans earn a rental income from their primary home. Now those things are good. I mean, we can't always be focusing on the negative. I mean, sometimes we just need to surface some of these positive things.
I mean, that's also the culture of the hustle. So there was a time when the economy was dominated by big companies. You worked for a big company. There was probably someone in the house who was a mine worker. Things went from there. Now there's maybe a little bit more of a kind of, I've got to do this for myself.
No, absolutely. But funny enough, it seems to be a lot more prevalent amongst young people. Young people between the ages of 18 and 29. I mean, 75% of them actually saying they have more than one income. But when you go up the higher age brackets, that number actually declines. So at 75% of young people between the ages of 18 to 29, when you go to 30 to 49, it goes down to 61%. When you go 50 plus, that number drops to 31%. So what it tells us here, Steve, is that young people, I don't know whether I should say it's social media or, the other ways that they are able to generate income. Maybe they're influencers there, but young people actually have secondary income. That's encouraging, especially when you consider the fact that our unemployment rate for young people sits around 54%, which is very high. Now, what that means also, Steve, is that if young people enter the labor market at a very late stage, they cannot save adequately for their retirement. Now, when they start having a secondary income, it gives them the opportunity to start creating wealth because they start with their backs against the wall.
When we talk about the growth in financial literacy, which I think must be playing a role, and I do think, schools have been doing a pretty good job. I mean, I learned nothing about money at school, nothing. So quite a lot of people are now valuing the financial education they get from institutions, and institutions obviously need to manage that quite carefully. They hold people's financial futures in their hands.
No, absolutely. And I think what stood out for me when we started looking at people's confidence in, financial literacy, the growth of financial literacy in general, but also about a number of people are starting to believe in financial advisors. I think we saw that number go up to 45% this year, which is encouraging. Because, look, when you have a legal problem, you speak to a lawyer. When you have a medical problem, you speak to a medical doctor. But I think it took a while. It may be because of the trust deficit that exists perhaps maybe in the industry. Of course, we've had some bad apples. So at times it tends to tarnish the image of the sector. But the confidence is coming back again, and people are starting to believe in speaking to financial advisors.
Very important, that whole idea of speaking to an expert. All right, we do need to look a bit at the bad. And despite this optimism, I mean, there's a sort of underlying, when I say the nature or the structure of our society means that financial stress is pretty persistent. There's a large number of people who are very, very stressed about it and have been for quite a long time.
No, it's true. I mean, we see about 38% remain highly stressed. And women, report that they've got lower satisfaction when it comes to their financial situation. And you can understand that. We still have the issue of pay parity, I think it's taking some time, but of course there are some institutions or employers who are doing good in as far as that, but generally women feel less satisfied compared to their male counterparts. Yeah.
Is it also about the stress of seeing your child go hungry? And I'm not saying that a man isn't stressed by that, but we know, I think the figure is 38% of children in South Africa grow up in the same house as their father. So I mean, it's woman-headed households in the main, and they would feel that stress very acutely.
No, absolutely. But also, women tend to be a lot more challenged because remember, they at times when they conceive, they take maternity leave. And of course, because they are the primary caregiver. So whenever there's a problem with a child, they are more likely to be out of work for a couple of days. It could be family responsibility of the child. So now you find that from a career progression, sometimes in some instances they get overlooked because of having to deal with these big responsibilities and having to juggle around.
We talk about the levels of debt coming down, but there's still a very high percentage of people who are worrying about debt quite a lot.
look, it's still coming down, but unfortunately, it's still there. What is concerning, though, I know we may, if we've got time, we may get there. What is worrying, though, is that there are people who are 19% of them who are borrowing to go bet. So I think when it comes to, it's going to take a while, but at least the graph is pointing in the right direction. We're seeing that reducing over time.
There's also, of course, we know the nature of our families because of how our society is, that most people are supporting children, and it's not, one or two children. It's often their children of a sister, maybe a child of another relative that needs help. And that really does, take it from me, children are expensive, but it really does add to the concern. It adds to the financial burden.
No, absolutely. We still have quite a number of people who are sandwiched between having to provide for their immediate family. The last time I said this, somebody from Labour challenged us, but no, comrade, when you say family in culture, family means everybody. But for simplicity, when we say immediate family, we're talking about a person and their spouse and with their children. But the minute you start helping your brothers, your siblings, your extended family, your uncles, your aunts, yes, you're a family. But this is why some people, especially amongst young people, tend to be a lot more resentful about the having to provide for extended family, because they feel that they cannot create generational wealth early enough. Because they have to deal with this. But that's the reality of where we've come from. That's the reality of how we're socialized.
And then people are also dipping into their savings. So their savings are getting weaker over time.
Well, we've seen that, Steve, with even with two pots. People cannot resist the temptation of dipping into savings. Even if you're told, this is your future money, but you do have an option to take it. But it's for emergency. But no, we will still dip into the savings. Although I think when we did our own surveys with these occupational retirement funds, we found that 45% of people said they withdrew from their two pots in order to pay off debt. I think we need to continue to monitor that. Is it really debt, or is it the other debt, which is Mashonisa?
All right, John, we do need to talk about the ugly and online gambling, the explosive growth in online gambling. The thing is about why people are gambling is what scares me.
No, absolutely. Look, I think a lot of people, when they start, they say, well, it was just for fun, it was for entertainment. But then you have others who are saying, well, actually, I'm gambling because I need to cover some expenses. Here we're talking living expenses, and although some say we're doing it to make a living, but it is concerning that about 52% of working South Africans are saying, well, they are gambling. Let's acknowledge firstly that the gambling sector, it does create jobs. Let's give them credit for that. They do contribute to GDP. It's not to say that we need to discredit the sector. We're just saying that if it's uncontrolled, it can become a problem, because what we are seeing here is that 19% of gamblers said they often borrow, or sometimes they often borrow money in order to fund the gambling. 24% of them said, well, they found themselves in financial difficulty as a result of gambling. We do know that if we start looking at other social impact of gambling, it does get worse. It can even get to a point where some people actually commit suicide. It is certainly something that we need to continue to monitor over time. Yeah.
John Manika there, the head of financial education at Old Mutual, shedding some light on the state of our finances. John Manika there, the head of financial education at Old Mutual, shedding some light on the state of our finances.
702. The best of the Money Show from this week.
Your shapeshifter this week, Frans Baleni, the former General Secretary of the National Union of Mine Workers. He's now the chair of the Government Employees Pension Fund, looking back at his career journey.
Stephen, firstly, it was by accident. I ended up working in the mines because my schooling was disrupted by the energy of 1976. And therefore, I was advised by my close comrade to say the safer place might be in Welkom, where there's a mine. And because I've lost my academic performance bursary, so I was 19 when I ended up in a gold mine called Welkom mine. The requirement then was that you must weigh at least 50 kg. And therefore, elderly people advised me to eat a loaf of bread and milk and not go to the toilet before I take up the scale.
Were there other people from your community who were doing that? I mean, I realized that for many, many people for a long time, mining was sort of the only thing there was, if you weren't working on a farm perhaps or in some other way. But were there people from your community there? I mean, I've always felt going underground must be quite a scary thing the first time.
Look, coming from the township, there were very few people working the mines. Mainly people in my town used to work in a railway. We used to call it railway then, now Transnet, telecommunication, and various other power, which was public works, and around the farms, which were around the town. Hardly miners, really. I was not even aware that there were any of my homeboys or girls working in the mines, except for Jacosfontein, which was close by, which had a diamond mine.
Where were you growing up? What kind of community were you growing up in?
I grew up in a small town in the Free State. My parents originally coming from Stekspruit. They moved along into the Free State. That's where I grew up. It's dominantly a Sotho-speaking area with very strong Afrikaans because it's surrounded by farmers. That's where I started my schooling, and I had to learn do in Sotho, not Xhosa. And then later on at high school, I moved to the Eastern Cape.
Okay, so now you're in the mines, you're in Welkom. The union movement, and at the time, so the NUM, as I understand the history, you'll know it far better than I, is kind of 1984-ish, early 1980s. I think there was a big mining strike. Was it 1984? Was it a little later than that? I presume you would have been part of that. 87, that's right. You would have been a part of that, and that would have been a very exciting and maybe a very scary time as well.
Yes, coming with the energy of a student was fighting for some form of rights and getting into mines, and black workers had no union, only white craft workers. And therefore, it was a burning thing that we don't have a union. When a call was made to say, hey, there is a gentleman, a lawyer by training, who has started a union and in Carltonville, Western Deep Levels, and we started joining, recruiting. The union was formed. I was one of those founder members in 1982. In no time, we ended up being the fastest growing union in the continent. Because in one mine, you would have easily 60,000 people. In my shaft, we were over 20,000. And we're staying in a hostel. It was easy to recruit and easy to convene meetings. And we started to mobilize on issues affecting workers, food, accommodation, working hours, all those. Safety was one of the key issues, which was a recruitment tool for the union.
What happened to that young lawyer, Frans? Where did he end up?
And he came to address us. Initially, some people were suspicious to say, this young man who has never been working in a mine, who have been robbed by people who are selling insurance before, but we were convinced by those who have interacted with him, such as Dr. James Mutlatsi, who was a mine worker, Director Matlala, and few others. And we bought into the idea. And he was very, when we go to a meeting with him at the Chamber of Mines, he was such a fighter, Stephen, and would take notes, some of the bombastic word, so then we can quickly go back and fight our employers using some of these terms, even if they were not fitting in your sentence.
And what happened to him? I mean, he started a union. His name was Jimmy Matlatsi. He had, if I remember, a father who was a police officer. Where did he end up? Can you remind us?
Just before reminding you, Stephen, I must tell you about the 1987 strike, which was 21-day strike. And 50,000 mine workers were dismissed, including myself. 11 were killed by mine security. I was later then reinstated. We did not get any additional increase, but we got for the first time a retirement fund, which is called Provident Fund. That Provident Fund now is over 60 or 70 billion rand.
Sure.
That miner, that general secretary, who was a lawyer by training, ended up being a secretary general of the ANC. We were very reluctant to release him because we thought the union will collapse, and were persuaded by Ndate Nelson Mandela, who came to us at head office and persuaded us that this way of presenting it, and Mandela was a good negotiator, and then we released him. The story, end up in business, and now he's the president of the country.
Exactly. Cyril Ramaphosa is the person you're talking about. You took a long time to get to the name. So I want to fast forward a little bit. And I remember the weekend. So you were the General Secretary of the NUM, at the National Union of Mine Workers. At the time, it was the second biggest union, I think, in the country, because NUMSA had overtaken you. There was a long period, and I remember going to press conference after press conference during the time that NUMSA was eventually expelled from COSATU. But after that, there was a general secretary. You were voted out as the general secretary of the NUM, and I'm sorry to ask this, but I just felt maybe it's the right moment. What do you think was happening in the NUM at the time? When you look back now, a long time ago, was it about personalities, or was it about the future direction of the union, or was it about something else happening in the union movement? Because there were a lot of deep things happening in the union movement that led to that moment. A difficult moment for you.
Yeah, certainly. And my wife bought me a book on that in 2015. He said "End of Power," and he said it has nothing to do with you. Read the book, and indeed it had nothing to do with me. My view is that what happened in the ANC then up to now started to get into the labor movement, where it is about individuals, it is about material condition, rather than interest of those who are serving. Unfortunately, as we speak now, Stephen, there are hundreds of unions registered, which either splinter unions because people have lost power, and then they form their own unions. There's fragmentation. We've got more federation than we started the labor movement. So it's unfortunate that it has become splinters and splinters, and not that force which was highly respected by both the employers and government.
Yeah, one industry, one union. That idea has just completely disappeared, and the competition has weakened. Yeah, and it's weakened the union movement. You can see it.
It has weakened the union movement because you'll find that in one a company or one industry, there are multiple unions, some in the same federation, and therefore it's divide and rule.
You've been doing other things after, I call it your union life, Frans. I don't know what you call it. How have you found it being outside of unions? And if I may say, sort of going from unions to a boardroom. I don't know if you had to change what you wear to the office every day, but have you found that quite a big adjustment? Was it a bit strange? You would have been on boards before in your previous position, but was it quite a sort of moment?
Yeah, fortunately, the union prepared us. One of the good things about people like Cyril Ramaphosa and Gwede Mantashe was to encourage us to study, upgrade our academic positions, and to learn. And therefore, I started to serve in a board while I was still in the union. I served in the Eskom Electricity Council then, and later on it became a board. I served at the University of Johannesburg as a council member for 15 years. And by the time I was on my own, I got a number of invitations to serve in the boards, and that leadership, that skills I've learned from the union, especially serving the interest of others, was actually very usable, user-friendly for me in various boards which I serve up to now.
Frans, you're chair of the GEPF. You've been on the board of the Development Bank of Southern Africa. How do you see your role now? I mean, you have a lot of life experience. You've been part of the transition in South Africa. Is it about providing, I suppose, some sort of guidance to these institutions? And I say that knowing, I'm afraid to mention, that there's a lot of controversy sometimes about the role of people on boards.
Look, Stephen, GPF is one of the largest pension fund in the continent. It's number one in the continent. An unaudited statement gives us over 2.7 trillion, but audited 2.3 trillion. And this is money of over 1.7 million active and pensioners. And therefore, anybody who provides service to those members must really think twice that I'm dealing with other people's money. It is their life saving over a period of time. And therefore, my role is to ensure that nothing goes wrong. The team, the colleagues, and the trustees will ensure that everybody does what is supposed to be done. And we're fortunate to have a very good team, both in terms of management and very active trustees. I've never seen trustees who read the pack. I've seen in other boards where a board member open a pack in a meeting. In this instance, these ones, they read, they question things, and I'm quite fortunate to serve with a collective of this nature.
When you're making a decision, what are you thinking of first? Are you thinking of the fund? Are you thinking maybe of government? Are you thinking of the workers who belong to the fund? I mean, I presume that's the main interest that you need to look after.
Firstly, you check who's the shareholder and what is the attitude of the shareholder. In other words, is there sort of a shareholder compact and you have space to run what you're supposed to be doing? Secondly, the peers, the people who are going to be working with. If I found that there are people who are questionable sort of profiles, I'll be very reluctant to serve in such a board, right? My image is the only thing I have. And thirdly, is to look at the history of the entity. Does it need penal beating? Does it need to grow? Does it need to be sustained and maintained? All those things, you take them into account.
That was Frans Baleni looking back at his journey from union leadership to governance in the public sector, now, of course, chair of the Government Employees Pension Fund.
The best of the Money Show
on 702.
702.
Thanks for being with us on The Money Show this week. We'll be back with you again at 6 o'clock on Monday. Thanks for listening. Look after yourself. Have a good weekend.